Welcome to Maths with EJD. In this video, I'll be talking about 4 trigonometric quadrants. And what these quadrants teach us, what it to help us with, is how to know the signs attached to angles from 0 to 360 degrees. How to know the signs attached to angles from 0 to 360 degrees, and how to actually break them down into corresponding angles in the first quadrant. Now, this is how the quadrants go. Look at this. Okay, you have this, and we start from what you can consider the x-axis, right? This is 0 degrees. That's where we start from. And from 0 degrees, we go to 90 degrees. That's 90 degrees. And you know, angles are calculated anti-clockwise, right? Against the direction of the clock. And from 90 degrees, each quadrant is 90 degrees, as you can see. From 90 degrees, you go to 180 degrees. From 180 degrees, you go to 270 degrees. And from 270, you go back to 360 degrees, which coincides with 0 degrees. Okay? Now, one thing you need to understand is that in each of the quadrants, there is something that is positive. So for instance, all of the trig ratios are positive in the first quadrant. That's between 0 and 90 degrees. Whereas only sine is positive in the second quadrant from 90 to 180 degrees. And only tan, of course, if sine is positive between 90 and 180, then it's reciprocal to, which is cosec will also be positive within that range. Then, of course, tangent is positive between 180 and 270 degrees, and automatically its reciprocal cotangent will also be positive. And the fourth quadrant, between 270 degrees and 360 degrees, only cosine is positive. And of course, it's reciprocal, which is secant, will also be positive in that quadrant. So that's extremely important. Now, the other thing you want to know about that quadrant is that if in the first quadrant you have theta, in the second quadrant, what corresponds to theta in the second quadrant is actually it's going to be 180 degrees minus theta, very important. And in the fourth quadrant, what is going to correspond to whatever you have in the first quadrant is actually going to be it's going to be okay, it's going to be 180 degrees plus theta. So I'm going to give an example of all these things. So it's be 180 degrees plus theta. And in the fourth quadrant, what is going to correspond to theta is your 360 degrees minus theta. That is what is going to correspond to theta in each of those dimensions. Okay, so let's take such examples. Okay, let me use 45 degrees as a very good example. 45 degrees. So let's assume that in the first quadrant, so let's take a first quadrant angle first. In the first quadrant, you have, thankfully, we've done special angles in the previous video. So in the first quadrant, let's take it that the angle in that first quadrant is 45 degrees. So, we can take sine 45 degrees. We already know sine 45 degrees is 1 over root 2, which is 0.7071 or something. And then, of course, we also know that cos 45 degrees is equal to 1 over root 2 again, with the same 0.7071. And lastly, we know that tan 45 degrees is equal to 1, like that, just 1. And all of these are positive. All these things are positive. They are all positive. I think it's important to emphasize that positivity, because here we know in the first quadrant, all the trig ratios are positive. All the trig ratios are positive. That's the emphasis we want to place on that. Everything is positive. So that's the first quadrant. Now, what we are saying is that if we get into the second quadrant, what is going to correspond to 45 degrees is going to be 180 minus 45. That's like 135 degrees. So in the second quadrant now, so if you go into the second quadrant, say we have in the second quadrant, let me do this. So let's say in the second quadrant, we now have a theta, which is 135 degrees. So since it may not be, apart from when you're using calculator, right? It may not be easy to just deal with 135 degrees. So the easy way to go is that you want to break this down into an angle and a corresponding angle in the first quadrant. So all you just need to do is to know that 135 degrees, you need to understand that 135 degrees is the same thing as 180 degrees minus 135 degrees, which is going to give you 45 degrees in the first quadrant. Now that you have 45 degrees in the first quadrant, don't forget you're still dealing with something in the first quadrant, in the second quadrant, except that now you have a corresponding angle in the first quadrant that can help you to easily do whatever you have to do with it. So in this case now, you now know that cos, okay, let's start with sine, right? You know that sine 135 degrees, sine 135 degrees. Okay, this is a side, right? So sine 135 degrees. Let me do this carefully. Okay, so you know that sine 135 degrees. In the second quadrant, sine is positive. Sine is positive in the second quadrant. So sine 135 degrees is still going to be positive of sine 180 degrees minus 135 degrees. And that is positive sine 45 degrees. And that is equal to positive 1 over root 2 as we know it. Okay? But now you know that so cos 135 degrees is going to be, because cosine is negative, is not positive in the second quadrant, only sine and cosec are. So because cosine is not positive, it means you're going to have minus cosine of 180 degrees minus 135 degrees. And that is equal to that's going to be minus sine. Oh, sorry. Why am I using sine all the way? So minus cos 45 degrees. And that is minus 1 over root 2 because cosine is negative in that place. Then if you take tan 135 degrees, okay? So that'll be minus, because only sine is positive in the second quadrant. So that'll be minus tan 180 degrees minus 135 degrees. And that is equal to minus tan 45 degrees, and that is minus 1. So it means that tan 135 degrees is minus 1. So you see, being able to break it down into an angle in the first quadrant helps you to easily find this. But then knowing that only sine is positive in the second quadrant helps you to know that cos and tan will be negative. So those are the two things. Be able to, any angle you have, be able to break it down to something in the first quadrant, because if you're using a table, in the table, you only get angle from 0 to 90 degrees. You only get first quadrant angles. But if you're able to break it down appropriately, then you can do that. And then all you just now need to know that in that quadrant, a particular quadrant, only this particular trigonometric ratio is positive. So that helps you. So when we go into the third quadrant, still talking about something like 45 degrees, right? So here you're going to have 225 degrees in the third quadrant. In the third quadrant, right? Let's say that you have a theta that is 225 degrees. Theta, which is 225 degrees. So what you are going to have here is this. Okay, maybe what I should have done here, this is what I should have done here. So any theta you have here, right, you're going to have that theta, minus 180 degrees. Yeah, I think that's a better way. Here you have 180 degrees minus theta. So, but in the third quadrant, you have theta minus 180 degrees. So in this case now, all you just need to know is that in the third quadrant, only in the first quadrant, you already know that only sine is positive. In the second quadrant, in the first quadrant, all positive. But in the second quadrant, only sine is positive. In the third quadrant, only tangent is positive. Very important. So for you to do this now, you want to do two things. You know that the sine of 225 degrees in the third quadrant, only tan is positive. So sine is going to be negative. So the sine is definitely going to be negative now of sine 225. That's theta now minus 180 degrees. 225 minus 180 degrees. And you know that is minus 45 degrees, minus sine 45 degrees, you know, minus sine 45 degrees. That is minus 1 over root 2 again. So that is taken. Then what if you have cos 225 degrees? You know, in the third quadrant, only tan is positive. So it means cos is also negative. So you have minus cos 225 degrees minus 180 degrees. And that is equal to minus cos 45 degrees, which is minus 1 over root 2. And lastly, you have tan 225 degrees. In the third quadrant, tan is positive. So you have plus tan 225 degrees minus 180 degrees. And that is equal to minus tan 45 degrees. Sorry, plus tan 45 degrees, which is simply plus 1. Okay? That is about the third quadrant. Now, what if you go into the fourth quadrant, which is between 270 and 360 degrees? So in the fourth quadrant, the angle that corresponds to um to 45 degrees in the fourth quadrant, which is from 270 to 360 degrees, the angle that corresponds to 45 is 315 in the fourth quadrant. So here, if you have theta to be 315 degrees, so you know in the fourth quadrant, only cosine is positive. As of all the basic four, only cosine is positive. So in that case, what happens? You just know that that sine 315 degrees is the same thing as minus sine 360 degrees minus 315. You already see the breakdown. I said in the fourth quadrant, you should have 360 minus whatever theta you are given in that quadrant. So the theta we have here is 315 degrees. So 315 degrees is equal to, so, but since it's sine 315, because only cosine is positive, so it means sine 315 is minus sine 360 degrees, which is minus sine 45 degrees. So it means that sine 315 degrees in the fourth quadrant corresponds to 45 degrees. So this is simply minus 1 over root 2 or minus 0.7071. Then cos 315 degrees. Cos is positive in the fourth quadrant. So that's plus cosine of 360 degrees minus 315 degrees. And that is equal to plus cosine of 45 degrees, and that is plus 1 over root 2, like that. And lastly, you have tan 315 degrees. In the fourth quadrant, only cosine is positive, so tan is negative. So you have minus tan 360 degrees minus 315 degrees, and that is equal to minus tan 45 degrees, and that is equal to minus 1. So basically, talking about the four trigonometric quadrants, all you just need to know is, first of all, know that in the first quadrant, all trig ratios are positive. In the second quadrant, only sine is positive, and of course, it's reciprocal. In the third quadrant, tan is positive. And in the fourth quadrant, cos is positive. And then you also want to know that in the second quadrant, to get the corresponding angle in the first quadrant, you do 180 minus theta. To get the corresponding angle in the third quadrant to the first quadrant, that's theta minus 180. And in the fourth quadrant, 360 minus theta. So you know the sign and know the breakdown to the corresponding first quadrant angle. And that's what these four trigonometric quadrants are about. So mastering this is really going to help you in your trigonometric journey. Okay, so that's the end of this video. Try to go over this again so you can really understand it. So see you in the next video. If you have not subscribed, be sure to do that and hit the notification bell so you can get alerted anytime I release a new video. Please also like, share, comment. I mean, a lot of people will benefit from this. Share with them and let them see that trigonometry does not have to be difficult. Thank you for coming along all the way. See you in the next video. See you in the next video.